Hey, this is Brad from peacelovegarden.com, and today I am working on setting up my bucket planter for the spring here. I'm getting my pepper plants all put in, and I thought while I was at it I would give you a little look at how my system is set up and go over how to set up a basic drip irrigation system for hydroponics. Now, you may have seen my video from last year. I did a video on my outdoor hydroponic peppers, which did show a lot of this system, and I'm going to try to go in a little more in depth on it today and actually show you how to put it together and things like that. Now, this system is scalable. You can use it for just a few plants. You could use it for many plants, and the difference is going to be how large your reservoir is and your pump and a few components like that. But this is very scalable. I'm also going to go over the key components of the system, and we'll also go over some tips and tricks on how to utilize this system best. Okay, so for components of this drip irrigation system, the main one here is going to be your reservoir. You can see mine behind me here. They are 255-gallon drums. I'm going to be growing 38 pepper plants, 6 tomato plants, and a few beans and things like that. So I'm going to have at least 50 plants, and even with these 255-gallon drums, I'm going to be filling them up a few times throughout the season. Now, another thing you're going to need for this, another key component, is going to be a pump. Usually you'd use a submersible pump for something like this. I just use those, they call them like power heads for an aquarium, large gallon per hour pump that's submersible, nothing fancy. I would recommend that you get something that's at least a third more gallons per hour, rated at a third more gallons per hour than you actually are planning on supplying your plants, because you do want a little back pressure on the system. You don't want just enough to flow out to the plants. And so figure out how many, with your drippers and everything, you'll be able to calculate how many gallons per hour. But I do recommend getting at least a third higher gallon per hour pump than what you need per hour for your plants. Another component you're going to need is a timer. Now, I use an interval timer that I got on Amazon, and it allows me to run it just minutes at a time. A lot of these typical household timers, the shortest interval you can get is 15 minutes at a time, and that is way too long for a drip system like this. And so all these components I mentioned here in this video, I'll put a link to in the description. So don't worry about that. But at any rate, you want a good timer, something that you can set down to just a minute or even seconds. You may only need seconds depending on the size of your system. So that's the kind of timer I use. It's called an interval timer, and we'll go over that a little more in depth in a few minutes. Other components you're going to need are, you're going to need some 1/2-inch irrigation tubing. You can get this at the home stores, big rolls of it, 100 footers if you'd like. You can also order it off Amazon. It's relatively inexpensive. It's a 1/2-inch diameter. It's very thin-walled tubing. It's very flexible. However, it doesn't make sharp turns very well, so if you need to make some tight bends, I would recommend getting some barbed fitting 90s. There's also times where you're going to need a T to tee something off, so you may need some barbed fittings like that. Just remember they're 1/2-inch diameter barbed fittings that fit that. Off of the 1/2-inch main line, you're also going to need 1/4-inch tubing. That is also sold at the home stores or on Amazon, and it comes in like a 50 or 100 foot length of this. You'll probably be using 18-inch, 12 or 18-inch pieces, which tap off of the main line. Those use a 1/4-inch barb fitting to tap into the main line, and there is a small little like puncture tool that you can use as well, very cheap. It's only like a couple of dollars, and you just use that to puncture the hole into the main line. You put a barb fitting in there, you put your 1/4-inch tubing off of that. After that, you're going to need some drippers. Now, I choose to use fixed rate drippers. I don't like the adjustables. They go out of adjustment, they clog up. Some plants get more water, some plants get less. It's a big pain in the butt. So I would recommend getting fixed rate drippers. For my 5-gallon buckets for my pepper plants and my tomatoes, I'm using 2 2-gallon per hour drippers at each plant. Now, even though they're capable of 2 gallons per hour, I'm only running this system for a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes at a time, depending on the maturity of the plant. But so that's the rate you want, something like that. You don't need a high gallon per hour dripper. So 2 gallons per hour, 4 gallons per hour, somewhere in that vicinity should do you okay. Even 1 gallon per hour would be fine. You're just going to have to run the system a little bit longer. One other factor to consider here when you're doing this is that if your nutrient reservoir, the water level in your nutrient reservoir is higher than your main line coming off of the pump, then you're going to need some sort of solid shutoff, because the gravity of the water will keep pushing the water through the pump just passively until it empties your tank. And so you don't want that. And so what you're going to need to do is either get a low reservoir that is lower than your main line of your irrigation system, or you're going to have to get a solenoid valve. And I'll go over how I set mine up here in a minute. It's really simple. Another thing you're going to need, of course, is some basic DIY skills. My system did require just a minor amount of wiring, nothing high-tech, no fancy control wiring or anything like that, but it did require some basic knowledge of how to run 110-volt wiring. You'll also need a little bit of plumbing skills for this, a couple plumbing tools, nothing excessive, a hacksaw even would work. I need a couple PVC fittings, just a little bit of PVC glue. I choose not to use primer on mine. It's not a high pressure system, so I don't worry about it welding together too permanently. The PVC glue alone will do in this case. So now let's take a look at how I have the system set up. I'll go through my system and show you how it works here. So these are my nutrient reservoirs. I have these set up with a submersible pump in the barrel. It might be kind of hard to see there under the water, but it's just a basic aquarium pump. And then I have a length of tubing going off of that, and it connects into a barb fitting on a bulkhead underneath the barrel here. So what I have here is a bulkhead that goes through the bottom of the barrel, and I have my pump hooked up to one side of that bulkhead on the inside of the tank with a barb fitting, and then outside of the tank I have my line here come out, and I did put a shutoff on it, and I also put a union so I can separate the controls here. Now, since my barrel is higher than my main line tubing, as I mentioned, I do have a solenoid valve to shut it off here, and this is useful for preventing your tank from siphoning out. On the other side of that, I do have a union as well, and a valve that I can shut that off to the outside. And the reason you're going to want some of these unions is if you have a winter that's going to freeze cold, you're going to want to empty out all these pipes, or else you're going to end up with a cracked fitting or something, as the water will be trapped in there. It'll crack, and it'll potentially ruin your solenoid valve, and it'll crack your PVC, and then the next year you're going to have to do some work on that. This is the timer that I mentioned. So this is my interval timer, and I'm going to show you here. So basically you set the time on this thing, and then you can pick a timed interval for this. So you can see I'm going to have mine come on at 6 a.m. and it's going to shut off at 6:02. So it's going to run 2 minutes in the morning. Then at noon it's going to come on, and it's going to run for 2 minutes also and shut off at 12:02. And then at 6 o'clock it's going to come on, and it's going to run for 1 minute, and then that's it. And it's going to repeat that daily. Now, that's the start of the season. I'm going to do that. As the season progresses, the plants mature, I'm going to assess their needs on how much nutrients they need, and I will increase those times that the pump runs. But I think last year the longest interval I ran was maybe like 4 minutes, and I do give them a bigger feed in the morning because they've been all night without water for 12 hours, and so the biggest feed I give them is in the morning. Now, how I have mine set up for wiring is I just have this switch on here. That is a completely optional thing, but this timer goes into a plug, and then what I did was I took this piece of an extension cord and I wired it into a box that powers this outlet. So this timer powers these two plugs right here, and what I have plugged into these two plugs is I have my pump This goes to my pump in my nutrient reservoir, and the other one runs down here to my solenoid valve. So when this timer kicks on, it kicks on this plug, which turns on both my solenoid valve and my pump simultaneously. Now I have mine set up in the garage here. This makes it easier for me. I have no worries about the wiring getting wet and all that, but I do have everything wired into a GFI outlet. I do highly recommend that you use a GFI outlet. What that does is, in the event that any water gets on something electrical, it will trip that GFI outlet and prevent electrocution. So I do recommend that, and through being that this is on a GFI, anything I plug into that is also safety precautions covered through that GFI as well. Now let's go outside and take a look at the drip system. Okay, so this is where that line comes out of my garage. My nutrient reservoir is inside on the other side of this wall in the garage, and you can see I just came transitioned back to a barb fitting here and went to my 1/2-inch tubing for the irrigation tubing. And what that does is that runs over here, and I have it teeing off and making a loop around my system. So as far as connecting the 1/4-inch tubing to the 1/2-inch main line, all you need is one of these little puncture tools here. It's just got a little kind of sharp end on it there, and you just use that to puncture a hole in your 1/4-inch tubing by pressing it on, pressing this into the tubing. As you can see here, just take it and just go like this. Boom, you got a hole in there. Now after that, you are going to need one of these little 1/4-inch barb fittings here. So it's a double barb, 1/4-inch barb on each end. One end goes into your 1/4-inch tubing, and the other end goes into the 1/2-inch main line. So you can see there I have the 1/2-inch main line with the 1/4-inch tubing tapped off using the double barbed 1/4-inch fitting, and then I drilled a hole through the bucket to run the 1/4-inch tubing, and then this way I don't have to worry about this tubing flopping out of the bucket. It kind of holds it a little more securely. And on this end I'm going to attach my two 2-gallon per hour drippers. The green signifies that they are 2 gallons per hour. If you're not sure what your dripper heads are, usually you can look up a color code on them. It's kind of a universal thing. And I'm going to put this on the end of the 1/4-inch tubing, and it's just going to lay there on either side of the plant like that and drip into the coconut coir. So there you go. There is the 2 drippers, one on either side of the plant, hole through the bucket, tubing tapped into the 1/2-inch main line. Now you just need to repeat that for all your buckets and you're good. Okay, so just to summarize, you're going to need a nutrient reservoir. In the nutrient reservoir, you're going to fill it with your hydroponic nutrients. You're going to put a submersible pump into the reservoir. You're going to run a 1/2-inch line off of that pump out towards your plants. When you get by your plants, you're going to tap off a 1/4-inch line to each plant, and you're going to put a drip emitter on the end of each one of those. The system is going to get turned on and off with an interval timer, and if your tank is higher, the water level, nutrient level in your tank is higher than your drippers, then you're going to need a solenoid valve to shut it off, or else it's going to siphon your tank completely. This system is totally scalable. You could use it for 100 plants, you could use it for 5 plants, you could use it indoors, you can use it outdoors, whatever you like. It's a great system. I tried it last year and it worked fantastic for me. You can check out my video on outdoor hydroponic peppers if you like. I'll put the little link pop up right here for you. And that's it really. So now we'll move on to a few tips that I have for you for utilizing this system best. Okay, so the first tip I have for you is pick a large nutrient reservoir. You can see I have 2 55-gallon drums here. I'm growing about 50 plants. I'm still going to need to fill this about 4 or 5 times throughout the season. Now this system is really automated, and so the less you have to fill that up, the better. If you have to come out every week and fill your nutrient reservoir and mix nutrients and balance the pH, etc., it's really taking away from the automation of this system, which is why I kind of set it up like this. I love the automation. Once it's up and running, I just go out and pick my crops, harvest peppers and etc. So Start with a large nutrient reservoir. You can also join several nutrient reservoirs together. I have mine connected together so it acts as one large reservoir, and it's just a matter of putting a plumbing connection between the two. Water finds its own level, so if you connect them at the bottom, the water will balance out and you can just pull off of one tank. You don't need to tap into each tank or have a pump in each tank. You can just have the pump into one tank, and as the water level goes down in one, it'll go down in all of them that you have connected together. Okay, so the next tip I have for you is to make sure that you keep that 1/2 inch main line below the level of your drippers. Wherever your drippers tap off, if they terminate at this height, keep your main 1/2 inch line lower than that. If you do not do that, what will happen is when the pump shuts off and that 1/2 inch main line is above the drippers, that water will continue to drip out of that 1/2 inch main line, and it will appear as though your tank is either siphoning or whatever, but it's really just that 1/2 inch line. So you're going to potentially overfeed your plants, drown them, whatever. You're wasting nutrients. So keep that 1/2 inch main line, the line that runs, tap your 1/4 inch drippers. Wherever that dripper is, keep that 1/2 inch main line below it. And that's going to really save you a lot of frustration. Okay, another tip I have for you is to ensure that you get even pressure out of all of your drippers. You want to take and loop that main line around your entire system and then tap off of that. If you do not do that, if you just run that line out and terminate it at a point, some of those drippers are going to get better pressure and some are going to get worse. Usually it's the ones at the end that will get the best pressure, and the ones closer to the nutrient reservoir will not get as good. So loop that line, that 1/2 inch main line, around all your plants. Put your drippers off of that and then tap into that and run a line back towards your nutrient reservoir, and that will help ensure that you get even water pressure at all your plants. Now, on the topic of even water distribution, another thing you can do to ensure even water distribution is all of your 1/4 inch tubings that you have going to each plant, make them all the same length. Figure out a length that works for all of them and cut them all to the same length. This is another thing that works great to make sure you get even pressure to all your plants. I tried this out last year before I even put a plant in the system. I tapped them all off with the loop around the main 1/2 inch line looping around and all the dripper lengths the same. And I put empty buckets in there and I ran the system, and then I measured the water that came out of them, and it was all the same. It was very equal pressure throughout the system. So this works great. So that's my 2 tips on even water distribution. 1/2 inch main line loops around, and all your 1/4 inch tubing should be the same length to ensure equal water distribution. So another tip I have for you is make sure your containers have good drainage. When you're using a hydroponic system, you don't want them sitting really in this way. You don't want them soaked, the plant soaked. So I use close to a 50-50 mix of perlite and coconut coir. The perlite allows the coconut coir to drain away excess moisture, but the coconut coir is very good at holding like the perfect amount of moisture, and the way the fibers weave, it lets enough oxygen go in there, and so as the water pulls through the coconut coir, it pulls oxygen down into the system, and as long as your buckets can drain properly, you will never end up drowning your plants. So make sure you have good drainage, use a good draining mix, and you'll be all set. A question I get asked a lot is, how long do I set the interval timer to run for? And while there's no hard fast rules on this, I would generally say start out with maybe a minute or 2 per interval 3 times a day. Now you're going to have to just keep an eye on your plants and determine from there what they are needing. If you have the interval timer running and you're seeing the nutrients running out the bottom of your containers, then you're probably watering too much and you can slow it down. The coconut coir is hanging on to a lot. Of course, temperature is going to factor into this. If it's really hot out, you're going to get a lot, the water is going to evaporate away more, the plants are going to use more. So in the cooler times of the year, when the plants are small, you're going to need very short intervals, minute or 2, only at the most. 3 times a day would be plenty. That's what I do for my plants, and it works great here in Michigan. I'm in zone 6B. Our max temperature in the summer is mid-90s usually. And it works great. And as the season goes on, I lengthen the interval times. So last year, by the end of the season, my plants were 3 feet tall at least. I was watering at about 4 minutes per interval, 3 times a day. And so that's it, really. You just got to kind of pay attention to what your plants look like they're needing. Keep an eye on the moisture in the soil. If they're drying out in between intervals, lengthen the time. If they're too wet, shorten the time, and that's it. Now the next thing I want to mention is that you see when I put my drippers in, I put a T and I split 2 drippers off onto either side of the plant. Now that's optional. You could get 1 4-gallon per hour dripper instead of using 2 2-gallon per hour drippers like I use. But I wanted that for it's a little more even water distribution, and I put it off to the sides of the plants. You don't want to put that dripper right at the base of the plant, and it's going to just drip right in the roots. You kind of want the roots to spread out and anchor in good, and so by putting the drippers on either side of the stalk, it lets that water get down on the sides of the plant and will encourage the roots to kind of branch out there. Hydroponically speaking, the coconut coir works excellent for wicking the water, so even if you water in these areas, it will eventually wick down into farther into the bucket or container that you're using, and so you don't really have to worry about that too much. The water will not just sit and pool there, where soil it's a little more dense and not as good at draining sometimes, and the water will just sit in those spots, and then the roots will grow into those areas. With the coconut coir, the water will wick down into the coconut coir. It's like a sponge, and it will just absorb it down into there. So just spread it out a little bit on each side of the plant. You don't want to rot the plant off right at its base, and you want to encourage root growth. So that's my tip, is to spread your drippers out off to the side of the base of the plant. So the biggest question I get asked is, what hydroponic nutrients do I use? And the answer to that is Master Blend. They're readily available, it's easy to use. You can order it from Amazon and have it shipped right to your house. I'll put a link to the description in the video down here. It's a very basic formula, it's easy to use, and it works great for all kinds of vegetables. I use it for leafy greens, tomatoes, peppers, beans, everything, and it works great. Now, sure, you could probably tweak this to, higher concentrations for these kind of vegetables and lower to this, but my system is feeding everything at the same time. And so I like to have a nutrient that's just good for all of them. And you'll see from my video last year, my plants grew fantastic. I ended up with, I think, like 80 pounds of peppers or something like that out of my little bucket planter out here, which I think is phenomenal. I didn't know what to do with them all. So consider Master Blend. They're a great nutrient. I think when it's mixed, it's 19.5 nitrogen, 18 phosphorus, and 38 potassium. It works great. So give it a try. I highly recommend it. There's no crazy things you have to do. It comes as a 3-part powdered formula. You mix them in a certain order. You do have to mix them in a certain order. So if you're wondering how to mix them, you use the Master Blend nutrients into the water first, then you add the magnesium, and last is the calcium nitrate. Calcium nitrate is always last. So Master Blend nutrients, the micronutrients first, then the magnesium sulfate, which is Epsom salt, by the way, and lastly you put in the calcium nitrate. And that's it, really. So that's the summary of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give that thumbs up a tap, and if you want to see more of my content, subscribe to my channel. I'll be posting some more videos this summer. I'll be showing you the progress of this system and how great it's working, and I hope to see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.